PSAs are advertisements that appear on television with the intention of drawing the public's attention to a certain topic. And there were several that were effective, not only because of the message, but also because of the shocking visuals. Welcome to the Disturbing PSA's Iceberg. I'm Sir Chris, I explore the internet and I make videos about it. Welcome viewer. In this iceberg, we will start from the least disturbing and quite genius PSAs to the shocking ones. This video will be censored a lot due to heavy topics, but if you're interested in seeing the uncensored one, it will be on Patreon. The PSA begins with American model Joanna Cassidy telling the viewer that she knows a peaceful and calm place, a forest. And every day, people are becoming more careless, and a simple cigarette can clean up an entire forest. Until we see Smoking taking off his mask while saying,
"If you knew it was me, would you have listened?"
This advertisement had two versions. The one we just saw was a remake, but the previous one was more bizarre. The oldest one was identical to the remake, but the mask and the bear were different. It starts with an adult who says he was waiting for his son to grow up, to mention the fact that drugs were just poison, and for him to stay away from those who promote it. But here comes the plot twist. It was speaking to the grave of his former son, who died of overdose at the age of 13. I said it once, and I will say it again. It's not worth 1 to 2 hours of fun for days or even months of pain. It all starts with shots of children looking at something in a scared way, as if something was about to harm them. Until we noticed that they were looking at the bizarre rabbit, death itself, a zombie, a clown, Santa, and a thief. While we see the children uncomfortable, until the last question appears. That begins with an emergency call, in which the couple was freezing to death. In the call, we can hear the man stuttering constantly due to the temperatures, while saying that he doesn't know where he is. And it all ends with Michael's last sentence.
"You're my last chance here. We're scared. Please help us."
The text on the screen says that Jane and Michael died in a blizzard while under the influence of. What makes this more disturbing is the fact that this was a real case in which we just listened to his final words. This one is very innocent, but uncomfortable at the same time. The ad begins with a mascot introducing himself and saying that the children need to be careful on the swing, on the slide, and even in the park. I don't know why, but there's something about the costumes that make it a little bit uncomfortable. Probably their empty stare, or the fact that you can't have their first impression. Only God knows what lies behind that mask. Talking Doll starts with a child playing with her doll, until she is called by her mother. When the doll is left alone with the viewer, it breaks the fourth wall and begins to say what the mother did to her child, like the fact that she punches her, and from then on, the doll glitches.
And punches her, and punches her, and punches her, and punches her.
This PSA had another version, but this time, it is a boy. This ad starts with a child having fun while making a cardboard costume, until when he hears the house door closing, he quickly hides with the costume that he made. And then, we see his father looking for him, until it ends with the last message. A PSA about a monkey. Or is it? The PSA starts by presenting us the piggy bank in the shape of a surfing monkey, shows us its price, and the amount of sales they had, which from 2 instantly goes to 17, after Scott bought 15, which Scott confirms, and then the screen goes black and says, an expensive habit. The funniest thing is, this PSA got backfired, from people upset because they wanted to buy the monkey, but it was just for this ad. Honestly, even I would buy it. The PSA starts with 2 puppets, while the presenter talks about why your parents tell you not to accept things from strangers. In the meantime, one of the puppets said that before you put something in your mouth, you should ask your friend if you really should. And then comes the best part of this advertisement, the music.
Don't you stuff it in your face. Don't stuff it in your face. Though it might look good to eat.
The puppets may seem bizarre, but the music makes it worth. This advertisement is one of the simplest. We see a man go into the kitchen to take a pill. When he goes to pick up a glass, he feels something in his mouth. When he pulls it out, he sees the tail of a rat, which when pulling up more, ends up taking an entire mouse out of his mouth, and he runs desperately to wash his mouth. Rat, my favorite. And the text says the following: rat poison, just one of the dangerous ingredients that may be found in fake medicine from illegal websites. Mistakes is a PSA about road safety. In it, we can see two cars, where one of them makes the mistake of trying to cross too late. Before they hit each other, time stops, and they get out of the car. And a conversation begins. The driver who made the mistake apologizes because they thought he had time, but the other was going too fast. He begs, since he was with his son, but it was too late. And we end up seeing the accident in the son's POV. Other people make mistakes. Slow down. You remember the other? Forget that one. This one is the simplest. In this one, we see the face of a woman who was looking directly at the viewer, while a different version of the song Happy Birthday is heard. Throughout the ad, her life is sucked bit by the drugs, until that same woman dies. The corpse stares at the viewer for a second before being covered. This bizarre PSA was even considered the most scary anti-drug PSA, and it had two versions. The heavier version consists of the same woman who slowly dies, but this time the body is not covered. This PSA wanted to put us in the shoes of a young woman's father who forgot to say how dangerous are. The worst thing is, this PSA run during prime hours. The most interesting thing is that this one is a hashtag, and it starts inside a pub, while we follow a man go into the bathroom. While washing his hands, he looks in the mirror, until the glass suddenly breaks with the face of a mannequin. This happens to two more men, before it ends with the following text: what impact could a drink have on your night out? Basically, don't drink and drive. This ad starts in a call center, where we see each attendant talking to a different child. The first child says that her mother went to the bar, and she always comes back drunk. The second tells us about a group that was bullying him. That in the middle of all conversations, we can hear a phone ringing in an empty desk. And behind that desk was a paralyzed child, while the final message appears. This was shown in cinemas. In this piff, we see a woman trying to speak, but only the noise of a distorted guitar comes out. This is repeated several times until the guitar becomes increasingly distorted, confused, and long, until there is nothing left but noise. There are several versions of this piff. One where the phone starts to scream, and an arcade machine where a rubber hammer starts hitting a dinosaur consecutively. When I Grow Up starts with several children, where each one says what they wanted to do in the future. As they respond, a text appears saying what the children actually ended up being. But the fates were extremely heavy, such as a heroin overdose, a thief and a murderer, and even being abandoned by her family. The ad begins with Amy's story, in which she had a surgery, and for the pain, doctors gave her painkillers. She ends up becoming addicted to them, and to get more, she crashes her car on purpose. And in the end, they show us her X-ray. The other versions tell stories of different people. Kyle broke his hand to receive more painkillers, Chris broke his arm with a door to receive more, and Joe broke his own back with a car. The worst thing is that these stories are based on real events. a friendly advertisement, where Biggie Bear appears and starts talking to the viewer, until he's interrupted by the rabbit. After telling him not to return to his program a few times, he gets angry and starts beating the rabbit, until he takes out a gun and puts it in his mouth, which then shoots. The other versions are heavier, so much so that I can't show you the last one. The second version shows us the bear again, until Mr. Spotty appears depressed. After a conversation, the bear had something that would make him happy again, that he injects on him, and says that being happy has never been easier, and starts running. These advertisements wanted to alert parents about what their children might be watching on television. Things are starting to heat up now. Stop the Hate is a PSA that starts by showing us a baby, while the narrator said that this is one of the times that it doesn't matter who our neighbor is. That, out of nowhere, starts showing various images about the Germans, decay, and protests, while a disturbing scream passes in the background, and finally, the cemetery. A PSA against rabies. It starts with several people at the airport, until out of nowhere, several jump scares interrupt the ad of a child having seizures in the hospital. When the woman acts sus, the security guard calls her to be searched, and when he opens her bag, he sees a cat, which then cuts to the child in the hospital having seizures after catching rabies. The PSA begins with a strong image of a car that has hit a wood post, while the narrator says, in an accident, how hard you hit determines how fast you go, in which the car disappears and only the driver remains. From there, they explain and show what happens to the body during an accident, and after all, it just falls to the ground, completely shattered. The ad puts us inside Josh's mind, a kitchen assistant. While it was lost, someone asks him to remove the pot of boiling water from its place. As it was super hot, he looked for some gloves. The only ones that weren't being used were the wet ones. When he picks up the pot, he ends up sleeping and falls on his back. After which, we can only hear Josh's scream, while we see his skin melting at the same time. This PSA received several complaints due to the disturbing ending. Inside a store, we see a woman on the top of the ladder changing a light bulb. When leaning over, falls onto the showcase. The other woman screams for help due to the accident, but the woman who fell gets up and says that the company should have replaced that light bulb years ago, and that for that job, there should be at least 2 people doing it. The best campaign name, to be honest. The PSA begins with several faces of people who have died in car accidents, including several mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. Which then cuts to a car crushed in an accident, where at the end, he says slow down stupid. I can only imagine this PSA going out overnight. It starts with a model parade, in which several high-class people were fascinated by the fur coats. When the models take a turn, blood starts flying everywhere, while the sound of animals and chainsaws appear. When it's time to leave, her coat leaves a blood trail, and the final message appears. Allegedly, this set was to contain instead of animals. In this PSA, they place the viewer inside of a dog's thoughts, until the owner starts going down a path they have never been before, until they are now under a bridge. The owner puts a rope on the dog while he puts the other inside of the bag, while the other thinks he's just putting him inside of the bag to keep him warm, until he goes along. Which ends up with the last message as we see the bag struggling. It starts with a man vomiting several times, until the plot twist happens. After the message, we see the same man who was vomiting, putting on his firefighter's helmet and returning to the scene of the accident, where we can see the condition of the car crash, along with the bodies of the victims. He was actually recovering for what he saw. The beginning of this one is quite peculiar. It starts with something we have all seen, the images of cigarette boxes. which, after zooming in, goes to a person who supposedly had mouth cancer, while the camera zooms out of the affected mouth. She says that quitting is hard, but not quitting is harder. This advertisement was made to promote a line to help people stop smoking. Negatives was a PSA in Australia, and it starts with a high volume,
The negatives of speeding.
while showing us the negative sides of speeding, where we see a woman being run over, a man who is thrown from the motorcycle and ends up in a wheelchair, and also a dead person with desperate people on the tragedy. This was the 1-minute version, but the 30-second one is the lightest, as it doesn't show even half of what appears in the first. This PSA begins in a forest. After the fog, we can see a woman standing in the middle. After taking a cigarette, she turns into a rotting body, while the following message appears. Some people say that this PSA had a jump scare, but I couldn't find it. There's something about happy music and sad moments that I can't explain. Hell Bells starts with Christmas music, while they show us several videos about the consequences of accidents. Destroyed cars, people being rescued, bloodstains on the floor, and people in hospitals, which then transitions to a message. This PSA begins with a view from outside the house. Inside, we see 3 people eating at a table, until out of nowhere, both start beating the other man, until he's pulled into the room, only to be hit with the belt. This was a dramatization. In reality, the victim was 6 years old. Over and over, shows us a man driving a car while listening to the radio, until a child leaves the sidewalk on a tricycle and goes to the middle of the road. The man tries to brake, but it was too late. His brain repeats that memory again and again, as the parents become increasingly desperate with the child in their hands. Then it shows us the man saying that he cannot stop thinking about that day, where he accidentally killed that family's daughter. This PSA begins with the vision of a person who enters a house that has been burned down. As he explores the divisions of the house, we can hear the whole voices of the family that had died in the fire. The voices call out each other in despair, until when the screen goes dark, we realize that everything happened because of a match. This PSA was so good that it actually received 2 awards. Hairgun starts off strangely. First, they show us a doll, and then a toy gun? While the doll was looking at the spectator, the right part of her head explodes due to a hair gun shot. I think it's a good time to say, YouTube, these are all advertisements, it's all done by professionals, so it's not real. Kitchen Mother is a Japanese PSA, where we see a mother and a child. The mother raises her head, only to inject in her arm, and eventually she dies, and everything becomes silent. The narrator speaks, until all that is left is this child's screams of despair. This PSA had 2 versions, one of 30 and the other of 15 seconds, where both transmit the same message, but one is faster than the other. In this PIF, we see an improvised hospital, while a child is heard crying during a surgery. They take the opportunity to tell the sad story of that child, where the militia, his 2 sisters, and club these parents to death. And the message says, they can't do anything without your help, while we hear distant shots and the child crying. This PSA starts with a photo of a person's face, while we can hear him talking about his deadly disease. And with each passing day, the disease only gets worse and worse, while his muscles were deteriorating. Even in that depressive situation, he wants there to be hope for others, since there won't be hope for him. Sarah's story is a PSA that shows us a woman entering an empty room, with nothing but a wheelchair. When she's about to leave, she's thrown against the wall and is beaten several times by an invisible force. until when it's over, the invisible pulls her by the arm and puts her in the wheelchair. And now you know what it's like to have MND. This PSA was published here in Portugal. In this advertisement, we are shown a man entering a dark basement. After walking a while, he enters a room that has several photos of children. He pulls down his pants and opens a drawer that had children's underwear in it and starts smelling it. He then tries to put them on, but ends up tearing them. This PSA begins with a real emergency call, where we can hear a desperate child asking for help because her mother X is hitting her mother. The mother screams for her to call 911, but she was already talking to them. Until later, she falls down the stairs while a gunshot is heard. While it ends with the child screams and crying. Now I wonder if the photos are really from the crime scene. Cortemos Esto was a campaign in Uruguay to raise awareness of traffic accidents. The PSA consists in a compilation of videos of real accidents, people being run over, and even lethal accidents. During the campaign, they even used a van that had been crushed in an accident. The other version of this ad is a little lighter, since it only shows one real accident while the other had around 8. This PSA shows us 2 men, in which one turns on the switch while we can hear the dog painful cries due to toxic gas. While it says that every year, Japan kills 450,000 dogs and cats, and tells the owners to not abandon their animals. One of the most graphic, this PSA begins with a conference, where the man explains how to treat a stab wound. While explaining what happens, shows us several real images of stab wounds, limbs with and even which then the screen goes black with the following message: carry a knife and you are more likely to get stabbed yourself. And let's move on to the ones I hate the most. The PSA begins with 2 men. One of them was tied to the chair while the other was heating a metal, and then we can see the man pushing the hot metal through his cheek until it comes out through the nose, while we can hear the victim's screams. But it doesn't stop there, because the same man passes a rope through that same hole and ends with the following message: this really happens to hundreds of bears every year, while showing us a bear that suffered from the same fate. Baby Monitor begins with a woman ironing, while a child can be heard playing through the baby monitor. The father then enters the room, and we can hear the man telling the child to come closer, and the child begins to cry while begging the father to stop, while the father can be heard with the child. The woman who was ironing the clothes was now in shock without knowing what to do, until the narrator says, if you don't stop him from her, we will find your strength, and everything ends. Before we finish, I want to tell you that I really wish you the best, and thank you very much for watching the video to the very end. Take care, my friend.